Hey, Slider Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Welcome to our special Joe Biden, the Mandate Man. This is about vaccine mandates. Is this legal? Is this constitutional? What are the political reasons for this? What are the legal ramifications, exemptions, medical exemptions, religious exemptions? We're going to talk about all of that. Does this apply to schools? Private school, public school? Does this apply to churches? And we're also going to talk to a state rep at the end of the special from Florida about how Florida is fighting back and give you a little bit of hope there. That's what special is about. I want to back it up just a little bit. I want to talk about the root of why so many people are okay with this. Right? How can anyone be okay with this, let alone it seems like a majority of people. Now, maybe I'm a little bit biased here at the moment. I live in California, and the recall just failed miserably, right? And I think one of the big reasons why our recall of our governor failed so miserably is because we are just an ignorant people. Most people are just, they don't know, they don't care, they don't pay attention, they're not watching this show, they don't watch anything, they don't know what's going on. John Stuart Mill, he wrote about this, right? He wrote a book called A Consideration on Representative Government. And he talked about passive characters, and how passive characters, ignorant people, leads to bigger government. But even worse, passive characters grows into jealousy and envy and hatred. Here's what John Stuart Mill said. He said, those who, while desiring what others possess, put no energy into striving for it, are either incessantly grumbling that fortune does not do for them what they do not attempt to do for themselves. Like, why don't I ever have any luck? Or they're overflowing with envy and ill will towards those who possess what they would like to have. And he says, now there can be no kind of doubt that the passive type of character is favored by the government. Interesting. People want the government wants passive people, and the government therefore wants envious people. They want people hating each other because in the end they get more power. Because when we're envious, we're not acting rationally. When we're envious, we're not acting like adults who deserve respect. Instead, we act like babies who need to be controlled. And then what does our government do? Control us. Let me explain. I want to talk about the infantilization, the turning into infants of adults. And we'll talk about what this has to do with vaccine mandates in a second. But treating people like babies, we see it with college kids. Right? We know all about the safe spaces of college campuses. Remember that a couple years ago, safe spaces? If that wasn't a canary in the coal mine that we should have paid more attention to, but like literally bringing puppies into the library during stressful times, not making law students take an exam because Trump won the presidency or George Floyd died and they just can't take it. Giving college kids coloring books, like little baby stuff, babies for adults. I mean, these are 18 to 22-year-old young adults, and we infantilize them. We treat them like babies. In many ways, they want to be treated like babies. So we know that with college kids. We also infantilize our kids. I see it all the time. Every single time I go to the playground, every single time, there's always some mom or dad there saying, be careful. Oh, be careful, Johnny, be careful, don't fall. It's like your kid's 8 years old. He can climb a thing. It's like the safest playground in the history of the world. He falls in like rubber mats. Like your kid's fine. But it's all, oh, be careful, ooh, don't fall. Parents cutting food for their 10-year-old, wiping their kids' butts. I mean, like kids in diapers until they're 4. It's like, holy cow. We infantilize our kids. A friendly recommendation to reassess. I got this advice from someone to reassess what your kids are capable every month. Every month, reassess what they're capable and push them a little bit more. To be honest, like a week ago, my wife and I called ourselves out. We kept getting our kids water for dinner, right? We'd make dinner, we serve the dinner, and then we'd be all sitting there, and Jack and Grace would say, they're 3.5 and 4. They'd say, can we have some water? And we would get up and get them water. And it was like a couple days ago, we were like, no, get your own water. Before you sit down for dinner that we worked for, bought, made, put together, presented, you think, I need a napkin and I need water. Go get your own. You're capable of this. We expect so little of our kids. And then we wonder why they do so little. 5-year-olds back in the day were milking the cows every morning and contributing to the family's functioning. 5-year-olds today can't get dressed on their own. And then we push them around in strollers all day while they're on their iPads like they're a bunch of cripples. When in reality, we're crippling them by treating them like babies. So we infantilize college kids, we infantilize our kids, but we also infantilize adults. Read an article the other day that this author, this writer noticed that the marketing pitch for so many products are cartoons. And she called out the Charmin, right? You know the marketing characters, mascots for Charmin. It's the cartoon bears. And she made this point. She's like, yeah, I get using cartoons to market to kids, but why are we doing that for adults? Why is everything a bunch of cartoons for adults? The previous do you remember the previous mascot of Charmin? Do we have that, guys? This is the previous logo. The baby. Soft as a baby's bottom. And now they're cartoon bears. Like, that's weird. I'm sure you've seen magazine advertisements from like the 40s and the 50s, and it was adults, right? It would be drawings of adults, and they were talking to each other, right? There's like pictures of adults. Do you guys have the Reagan one by any chance? I saw one the other day of Reagan, and it's just him, right? It's just him saying, hey, buy this thing. He's not dressed up like a bear or something, right? So adults are treated like babies and kids all the time. Employers monitor their employees like they're children. We have an obsession with therapy culture, and I'm pro-therapy, right? And we talk on my radio show all the time, we talk about childhood trauma and how you need to find the root of that childhood trauma and find out what it is that makes you act and think the way you act and think today. And that's an important process, and everyone needs to go through that. But maybe I don't pay enough attention to the second half of the story, which is get over it, right? You gotta find it, root it out, identify, and then get over it. Therapy culture today tells you that you're weak and vulnerable and fragile and helpless, and that's it. That's the end of your story. See you next week. It's like, oh no, that's not helpful. You got to overcome. We're forgetting the overcome. Some linguists did some research about tracking our language use, and now we speak in flashes. Like never before, we speak in flashes as opposed to the tweets. We speak in tweets as opposed to real discourse. We're becoming TikTok. And I see adults on TikTok dancing. Like, would you ever see Winston Churchill dance? Like, do you know who's the public official in America who has gravitas? Are you with me? Who's the public official in America who, when he speaks, you listen? Because he's a man who has something to say. Does that exist? Is there anyone in the public eye who's like that? No, everyone's doing TikTok videos or something. It's like, what are we doing? Our culture has made us infants. Our smartphones, all about immediate gratification, all about this exhibitionism. Here I am, look at me, look at me. So anyway, why do I bring this up? What does this have to do with vaccine mandates, Slater? We've been infantilized for so long, and what do infants do? Infants get scared easily. A couple weeks ago, our smoke alarm went off. It was at night, our smoke alarm went off, and my kids freaked out. Like, we went into their room and they were cowering. They were hugging each other. I'm not kidding. They're hugging each other on the bottom bunk, like a cartoon. It was like they're holding their blankets like up to their face, and their eyes were terrified. They didn't know what was going on. And it was really sweet because they're 3 and 4, they're babies. They're young kids, I should say. We're terrified adults. And when you're scared, you need a mommy and a daddy. When you're scared, you need a mommy and a daddy to come in and tell you it's going to be okay. You need a mommy and daddy in government to come and take care of you. The nanny state, it used to be called. And now we have our Daddy Joe, who's very disappointed in you, by the way, for not following his suggestions. His patience is wearing thin, don't you know? When daddy gets home, when daddy gets home and finds out that you're not following his demands, he's going to be very, very upset at you. His patience is wearing thin. Joe Biden's your daddy. And why not? We've allowed ourselves to be turned into a bunch of babies. Coming up next, we'll talk about the politics of this. Then we'll talk about the legality of it and what you can do to protect yourself, exemptions and the rest. And then we'll talk about what Florida's doing to push back on all this and what we can do as well. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, welcome back to our special Joe Biden, the Mandate Man, about the new mandates across the country of getting that vaccine. I want to go right to our friend John Phillips. He's the talk radio host in KABC in Los Angeles and also a writer at the Orange County Register. John, how are you, brother?
Good. I love the Mandate Man. That's almost as good as Corn Pop.
Did you see this coming?
I did, and here's the thing. Nothing will ever be good enough for them. The goalposts will constantly be changing. They're going to make it seem like it's this modest proposal that's just there to keep everyone safe. I know that when I went on a cruise earlier this summer, it was out of the Bahamas. They had a vaccine mandate for passengers to get on. We did it, and they said it's only because it's leaving out of the Bahamas. That's it. And then the cruises started going out of Florida and Texas and other parts of the United States, and we promised that's not going to be part of it. And now it's part of it. And nothing will ever be good enough for them. I saw that Bruce Springsteen was doing a concert in New York City, and he required proof of vaccination to get in the concert. However, if you took the AstraZeneca one, that wasn't good enough, and you wouldn't be able to attend the concert. Whenever I tell people that I took the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, they look at me like I'm running around licking doorknobs, and they treat me like I'm some sort of heathen with a death wish. And aren't you going to get one of the other ones on top of that just to be sure? It's like these aren't toys and cereal boxes. You don't need to collect them all. One's enough for me, but for the crowd that wants you to take it, and wants to ask you the details and wants the proof and why did you do that one and not this one, it's never ever going to end.
Oh, man, you'll never be fully vaccinated. Obviously in Israel they're now demanding a fourth. You have to get 4 in order to be considered fully vaccinated. And I think it's Merck and Pfizer are testing COVID pills, twice a day pills that you take. So this is just going to be a routine for the rest of our lives. What could possibly be the end? There has to be an end, no?
We're just going to be pincushions. And you look at what they're requiring now from federal employees. And I'm not entirely sure of the veracity of this one, but I was told that members of Congress and letter carriers at the U.S. Postal Service were 2 of the exemptions, where I guess you could show proof of a negative result. I guess they took pity on the postal workers, assuming they had enough of the rabies shots. You don't need to give them the COVID ones too. but this is just something that I think we're going to live with for a very long time. And right before they said that there are going to be these booster shots that are going to be required, I mean, literally the same week, the CEO of Johnson & Johnson said, "We're one and done. Don't worry about it. You're covered. You're good. No booster shot necessary." The CDC flipped out and said, no. And then they said, all right, we're going to have a booster shot. It's going to be 8 months after you took the first one. And then they revised it and said, oh, no, it's going to be 5 months, not 8 months. They don't need a press secretary. They need an auctioneer at the rate that they're going. And they wonder why they're losing people when they change their position that frequently within the course of a week, and they have complete certainty with everything they're telling you as they're telling it to you, even if it's totally different from what they told you yesterday.
Amazing. We're going to talk in the next segment about the legality of this. So we're not asking for legal advice, but what do you recommend a business owner do? Right? You own a business. You got 110 employees. If you have 101 employees, you'll probably fire a couple just to get under the 100. But say you got over 100 employees. What do you recommend one does?
they're in a tough spot, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm certainly not going to give any of that advice. But if you own a restaurant, you're there to sell chicken wings. You're not there to make, demands on your employees or your customers, which is what happens in the city that I'm living in now. You have to show your proof of vaccination if you're going to go have a patty melt and a scotch on the rocks. And the owners hate having to do it, but they also don't want their licenses pulled. They're in a really weird spot because if you're a restaurant owner, you rely on a business license, you rely on a liquor license, you rely on administrative paperwork from the government to be able to lawfully operate your business. It's very easy for the government to crack down on them because you just suspend the license, you pull the license. And I don't know what I would do if I was a business owner. I'd be put in a very difficult position.
A couple weeks ago, the state reached out to all the doctors who were issuing mask exemptions for kids and said the same thing. We're going to pull your license from you. So everyone is dependent on the government for their livelihood, and this is the way that they're controlling it. It's really pretty sick. On that point, though, I've seen a lot of protests that have gotten relatively violent around the world. France, even England. Brazil's maybe a little different. They got a little different thing going on, but still massive amounts of people, Australia, taken to the streets. I haven't seen anything in the United States of America. First of all, have you? And second of all, why not?
No, I haven't. People protest in different ways. You see people post things on social media that now get taken down if the overlords in the Silicon Valley don't like what you have to say. Certainly talk radio is an outlet. Outlets like this is an outlet where people can, voice their displeasure with whatever is going on. But it's beyond the vaccine requirements and the mask mandates. Part of what's upsetting people is that they are using this as an excuse to ask for everything that they want. This is the Santa Claus list. You look at what the teachers demanded to go back to on-campus instruction. They wanted bonuses. They wanted a defunding of the police. They wanted universal health care. They want all of these things that don't have anything to do with anything, but COVID is the reason that they're using to ask for all of these things, and they've got a lot of them. And it's not just the labor unions that are doing it. Look at corporations. You now can't get a drink on an airplane because of COVID. If you stay at a hotel, they won't clean your room every day unless you request it because of COVID. Any cutback that any business is looking to implement is now being implemented, and they use COVID as the excuse. And people just at a certain point, you either fight everything, and every time you check into a hotel, it's a fight. Every time you get on an airplane, it's a fight. Or you just throw your arms up and you say, all right, they're being ridiculous, but what are you going to do?
And that leads to, and this goes back to something you said in the beginning, really two classes of society. And it's getting very othered, right? As you alluded to with your othered, even with the one shot. But the vaccinated, unvaccinated class differences seems like a very dangerous road to go down.
Well, yes, and it is emboldened people too. Everyone is now a hall monitor. At first, it was the mask. I run for exercise in the morning, and I would not wear a mask when I would run. I was outdoors. I was by myself. I was nowhere near anyone, and there would be a confrontation every time I'd go out.
Really?
I have, I have a lot.
What they say? What would someone say?
Oh, they would usually gesture, where's your mask? Why aren't you wearing a mask? You should be wearing a mask. Everyone felt the need to tell me to put the mask on when I was exercising in a very hot place and needed oxygen and exposing no one to anything. I have a ton of fruit trees on my property, the world's greatest grapefruit. And so people in the area frequently, when they take their morning walks, will come by and pick fruit from my trees. It generally doesn't bother me unless they're climbing the tree and they're going to fall and injure themselves and sue me. So I never really have any confrontations with them over it. I was on a phone call one morning on the East Coast, and I have a loud, booming voice. So if I have people staying at my house, I will take the call outside. So I was at the end of my driveway by the fruit trees on the phone, and this woman was walking her dog, trespassing technically on my property to steal fruit from my trees. I startled her. She didn't expect me to be there. And she turns to me and she goes, "Where's your mask? You should be wearing a mask." And I'm thinking to myself, you're trespassing and then you're going to steal from me and you're lecturing me about the mask? What the hell?
That's such a great John Phillips story. I love it. All right, let's go to passports, vaccine passports. That's obviously the next thing. New York City ahead of the game. I don't know, everyone's got their red line, right? I feel like more people, this is a red line, but I don't think it's going to be enough. And I didn't even know they have that in LA. They have vaccine passports. I'm in San Diego. We're right behind you then. That's ridiculous. And then in the name of it's never enough, what more are they going to add to these vaccine passports in order for you to have permission to do things?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it goes back to what we were talking about before. If a booster shot is available and they want you to take the booster shot, you have the first one or the first two, but you don't have the booster, is the passport valid? Are they going to accept it? I don't know. One of the big problems on the cruise ship for staffing purposes that they were telling me about is that frequently, if you have an international base of employees, you take a different shot depending on where you're from. So if you are from Brazil, for example, they gave some of the American shots, but they also purchased the Chinese shot. Well, the American government won't recognize the Chinese shot. They don't see that as being a valid one. So if you're vaccinated, but you took the vaccine from China, that didn't count. There's the Sputnik vaccine that different European countries would give, primarily in Russia, but in the Eastern Bloc and in parts of Europe. Well, that's not one that's acknowledged by the American government. So if you got the Sputnik vaccine and you want to work on a cruise ship, that's going to be a problem if the cruise ship leaves out of an American port. And it just leads to question after question after question, and nightmares for business owners, nightmares for travelers. What do you do if you're traveling to a country and you took the shot and it's not a shot that that country acknowledges or will honor? You're going to get stuck in some airport somewhere and, live like Edward Snowden. It leads to a complete nightmare for businesses, for travelers, for individuals trying to do the right thing, trying to comply, trying to do whatever. And there's just trapdoor after trapdoor after trapdoor, and they never end.
John Phillips, host of KABC, owner of the world's greatest grapefruit, which I'll have to join that lady in stealing one of these days in Orange County Register. John, always good to talk to you, brother. Thanks, man.
Thanks for having me.
Have an awesome day. Let's come back and we'll talk about the legality of this, right? What if you don't do it? And what if you're a business owner and you get slammed by OSHA? Like what? And we got to talk about exemptions too, medical exemptions, religious exemptions. Got a lot of questions in that front. We'll answer those next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, welcome back to our special Joe Biden, the Mandate Man. I want to talk about the legality of what the president has decided to do here with two men who have been in this fight for a long time. First, we're going to talk to Pastor Gary Least. He's the pastor of Calvary Chapel, Dayton Valley in Dayton, Nevada. He, along with the Alliance Defending Freedom, won a lawsuit because in Nevada, casinos were allowed to be open, but churches weren't. So they fought that fight, won that fight, and it looks like we may have another one coming our way. So Pastor Least is here and Ryan Tucker from Alliance Defending Freedom. Gentlemen, how are you both?
Doing great.
Fine, thank you.
Grateful you're here. Also, I need to note as well that there's churches in Canada and Australia that are mandating vaccines in order to go into church, which is absurd. Ryan, let's start with you. What is the legality of this executive order, the constitutionality of it, and particularly the fact that it's administered through OSHA?
Well, the fact that it's being administered through OSHA raises a number of issues. But right now, there's a lot of things we don't know. We don't know the details. President Biden, last week gave us some general comments, but without knowledge of the details or the scope of the mandates, it's impossible to address all of them with clarity at this point. But as you noted, the fact that the administration is using OSHA in order to put these mandates in place causes very serious questions.
It's very similar to, obviously, the CDC's eviction moratorium. When Congressman passed a law, CDC did it. And the Supreme Court struck that down pretty quickly. But they said, listen, the CDC eviction moratorium, it was based on a little never used sentence in CDC bureaucracy that has to deal with like pest fumigation. And they used it for an eviction moratorium. Do we even know what authority is even in OSHA that they're pretending to use to impose this mandate, or is that even super vague?
Well, they're temporary. They're attempting to use sort of a temporary procedure. What they want to do, at least what they've intimated, again, the devil's going to be in the details, is they want to use this rarely used temporary emergency procedure where they can bypass the normal rule and comment period to mandate this against a host of people across the United States. And so there's going to be a lot of litigation on this and a lot of questions that are still open.
Will it go to the Supreme Court?
Oh yes, I'd be shocked if it didn't.
How quickly do you think?
I think it'll happen fairly quickly. I think you're going to see scores of lawsuits being filed across the United States, and some of them could be consolidated. We'll have to wait and see how that legal process works itself out. But I would be surprised if it did not make its way fairly quickly to the United States Supreme Court.
Pastor, again, I want to thank you for standing up in the very beginning of all this. Why did you make a stand about opening in the first place last year? And why make a stand on this issue?
Well, you know, one of the things that we found is so critical is that people need the sense of community. They need the sense of fellowship. They need the sense of encouragement that is found in houses of worship. And so what we saw in the initial back in March of last year was that the necessity to close out of an abundance of safety was given to us as a request from our national leaders. And so we did. Even before the state got involved with a mandate, we went ahead and decided to do the flatten the curve, right? And in doing so, we thought we'd be back in a couple of weeks. We were energized to take and reach out, help the community, do that which houses of worship do. And then shortly after, we got hit with the mandate from the governor. We were very shocked, very surprised. We closed down and went to online format for several months. And then when he put the requirement or allowed the casinos to go back into operation at a 50%, we were shocked. We were shocked that people could go to the casinos and not go to church. And that's when we realized that we had to do something.
I'm so grateful you did. And what now with the mandates? What is your church's policy going to be with demanding vaccines for your members and guests?
Well, and again, as Ryan just said, we don't know what all this means. You know, we don't know what the mandate is, what and how it affects us right now. There's so much misinformation, so many holes in the plan as it is right now. What we're hoping for is that the right for us to assemble, the ability for us to be able to come together that was given by God remains in the place of us being able to do that. And we're willing to take that stand and to be able to do that. It's that critical and that important for people to be able to do that.
And Mike, if I could just add, I mean, you know, one of the 4 mandates that President Biden mentioned was this private employer mandate, the idea that if you have 100 plus employees, why 100? I don't know. Why not 99? Why not 101? I mean, who knows? But 100 plus employees, if you have that many, then of course you're required, according to the edict last week, to make sure that your employees have been vaccinated. Now, the idea that the executive branch can come in and tell a religious institution, a religious school, a church, hey, listen, we know what's best for you. And if you don't do it, then guess what? You've got to fire your employees. I mean, that is problematic on multiple levels. It invades upon the autonomy of the church, of these schools and these other institutions. And so we are very, very much concerned about this situation.
It's so obvious, and I hope the Supreme Court rules very quickly. Pastor, to the churches that are voluntarily in Canada and Australia, and perhaps even in America here, requiring you to have a vaccine to enter the church. What do you say to that? Could you imagine yourself turning someone away, a guest or a member away because they chose not to get a vaccine?
Well, you know, it's such a difficult thing. We've left it up to individuals and believe it should be an individual decision on whether or not to take the vaccine, to have the vaccine, and it needs to be that way. It also needs to be a matter of individual choice. I don't think that what's happening on the national mandate level should have anything to do really with what people do in the form of how they worship. And I think that there's protections that were acknowledged and put in place in order for churches to be able to operate with the autonomy, people of faith being able to exercise their faith in the way that they see fit between them and God. And so for the government to step into this, it makes for a very precarious situation, and not really sure what we're going to see come out of this. But our hope is that people will continue to gather, people will continue to be able to come together to worship and to do so in a safe fashion. And that safety is based on the knowledge that we have on what we need to do individually to protect ourselves.
Absolutely. And Pastor, what do you say to this argument? I get this a lot from people who say, all you unvaccinated people, and I'm not putting you in the position to defend vaccines or not or whatever, but just in general, when an atheist quotes 3 words of scripture and weaponizes it against a Christian, my flags go up. So when people say, Slater, everyone's got to get the vaccine, love thy neighbor. What about love thy neighbor? You need to love thy neighbor. Get the vaccine because you love thy neighbor, right? What do you say to that?
Well, and again, it's really impossible to argue with somebody that doesn't know what Scripture says, that wants to use it out of context. And we know sound bites and the gotcha moments are designed just for that. But the reality is that one of the best ways that we can love people is we can tell them the truth. And the truth is that there's a God, and there's a God that loves them, and that there's a God that is seeking to have a relationship with them, not just in relationship to trying to provide an earthly safety, but an eternal salvation. And that's the key to really what our focus and our concern is. So when it comes to loving people, there's a lot more ways to love people than simply by manifesting it through something that is being directed by the government. Let's start with loving each other in the sense of making sure that everybody's needs are met and everybody's the things that they need are put above our own needs.
Yeah, well, super well said. Ryan, back to you. What do we know about religious exemptions and medical exemptions, and whether or not those are honored? We're getting reports of hospitals, and there was some other organization, like United Airlines or one of the airlines, saying that they're not accepting religious exemptions at all. It's just like those don't even exist to them. Is that legal? And what's the deal? What's the precedent, or what's the rules about a religious exemption to something?
Well, certainly institutions, organizations that don't seek to accommodate those with real medical or religious exemptions put themselves in harm's way. Title VII, there's other laws, employment laws that deal with the fact that employers should accommodate those with true medical, religious exemptions. And we've gotten scores and scores, hundreds of phone calls, on this issue. And even with regard to the mandates we've been talking about, that President Biden mentioned last week, there's a lot of still open questions. I saw news reports this morning where they're still working out, again, some of the details on what that looks like. Are there going to be accommodations or are there not? And so I think in the coming days, in the coming weeks, we're going to see these issues being litigated, unfortunately, in the courts.
Amazing that they could issue all this without having all those details already ironed out and ready to roll, leaving everyone so in doubt.
Not the first time.
That's true. Tell me about what a religious exemption could be in this context. I've heard about the fetal, the aborted baby stem cell lines that were used in the development of the vaccine. Is that true? And is that a religious exemption? Well, Pastor, maybe I can ask you first. Do you find that to be a worthy reason for a religious exemption? And to our lawyer friend, is that something that businesses must honor?
A lot of that this comes down to is a matter of personal conscious choice in relationship to how we view and we interpret Scripture based on our lives and what God would tell us individually. And again, I'm going to continue to favor what is the individual's right to be able to make application to their beliefs, to their lives. And in that sense, yes, it would be something that would be considered completely in alliance with what the church teaches, that for us to partake in something that is the derivative of aborted babies and the fetal tissue that comes from those would be something that would be objectionable based on what we believe. Of course, being those that believe in the sanctity of life and believing that all life is precious and God-given, it does completely line up in that sense. But there's other senses and other things of conscience that people should have the ability, and we shouldn't have to prove why it is that we believe based on our faith and our trust in a maker that we should be exempt from something the government mandates.
Yeah, and Ryan, does a lawyer have to accept it, or Do you have to go through like a mini trial with your HR department to prove that you really, really, really believe this thing? Or do they have to take your word for it?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think you're seeing some of that going on right now. But these HR departments, folks that are in those positions, I mean, there's a presumption that when someone comes to you and says, I have a religious objection to this, there is a presumption that what they're saying to their employer is indeed accurate, unless there's some sort of objectifiable reason for them to question it. They should take that at face value. If they don't, then the employer itself can face potential liability in an employment context. So it's a very tenuous position. It's ridiculous that the executive branch is attempting to put these employers in this position to have to deal with these issues.
Yeah. Alliance Defending Freedom, go check out their website. Ryan, is there there's some documents on your website that can maybe help people who are looking for a religious exemption?
Sure, on that last topic, absolutely. adflegal.org, there's actually a vaccine drop down, and you can click on that, and there's some resources there to provide you some additional information.
Pastor, we only got about 30 seconds. Sorry to put you in this position, but I've been contemplating the fact that I think the root of all this hysteria about all this stuff is people searching for a savior. And they think masks are their savior, or a vaccine will be their savior, but they don't have the real savior. And also, people have not contemplated death in their lives. So something comes along with even this amount of survival rate, and people panic. What do you think about that? And what do you think the root is of people's anxiety?
Well, I think that the simple answer to this is Jesus Christ. And we know that there is a Savior, and we know that there is an opportunity for us to be able to have relationship with him and to receive that free gift of salvation by placing our faith and our trust in him. And we're seeing a time right now where exactly what God offers us, which is a absence of fear, driving what's happening in decisions of people. People are afraid, and they're afraid because they're looking at their lives in the span of 70 or 80 years and thinking that that's all there is. And reality is that every single one of us are going to live forever. We're going to live forever either in the presence of the Creator God that brought us into existence and will receive us back, or separated him from all of eternity.
Any chance to spread the gospel? I say we take it. I'm grateful for you, Pastor Gary Least, Calvary Chapel, Dayton, Nevada, and Ryan Tucker from the wonderful Alliance Defending Freedom. Gentlemen, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. God bless.
Coming up next, we'll talk with a state rep in Florida. And Florida's obviously fighting back against all this. We'll get the latest of how next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So when Biden issued his vaccine mandates the other day, I knew there's one state that's going to lead the charge in fighting back and pushing against this. I'm so grateful for them. Of course, it's the state of Florida. I mean, Biden calls them out every chance he gets. I want to go to one of their state representatives. He's the representative just outside Florida, or excuse me, outside of Orlando, Representative Anthony Sabatini, running for U.S. Congress as well. Mr. Sabatini, how are you, sir?
Great, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Big picture, why have you guys decided to be by far the state that is the opposite of what Biden's doing and everything?
Well, a lot of it just has to do with the spirit of Republican freedom, just the ideals that the legislature have had for a long time. But more importantly, now we have the best governor in the country. You know, since DeSantis took over 2 years ago, he's really led the legislature to be even more bold than it was for the last 20 years. You know, the Republicans have run Florida for 20 years, but I think we're finally coming to our own stride. So, you know, his leadership is pushing us forward.
I don't want to get off topic here, but sorry, I'm in California, so I'm just coming off of this recall disaster. And we're headed in one direction. Give me some hope about the future of Florida politics. Then we'll get back to the mandates.
Sure, sounds good. I mean, Florida is actually getting more Republican every single day. A lot of folks down here thought because of COVID, you're going to get a lot of liberals leaving, almost like locusts leaving these blue, horrible states and coming down to the free red states where they can still, do what they want to do. Well, the truth is we've actually attracted more Republicans than anything. We've closed the gap by another 50,000 in Florida in terms of Republicans versus Democrats. So we're getting more conservative. And our politicians are getting more bold. We have a great governor who's leading us in a good direction.
Oh, that's right. The bold is the key because we need that. We haven't had that for a long time. All right, let's go back to the mandate. So DeSantis said the other day that something about a $5,000 fine. Give us the details on what that's about.
Sure. Our governor did a very good thing. He issued a new executive order, or he's about to, that will assess a $5,000 fine on public sector employees being required to provide vaccination status and to being required to get a vaccine, for their employment, firefighters, police officers, city and county workers, state employees, that sort of thing. What I'm pushing for now in the legislature, and I believe the governor agrees, but we got to make sure it gets through the legislature, is shutting down all these woke corporate vaccine mandates too. I don't believe any entity should be able to take over the public health decision-making of any individual person. It should remain an individual free decision for them to make. And so that's the sort of the next step that Florida has. But right now, what we're doing is great. We have a couple bills being drafted. I have one that's being drafted that would declare the OSHA rule that Biden's about to announce as just null and void, and make it that we don't recognize the federal government's authority to issue fines or close businesses, businesses that have more than 100 employees that aren't following the Biden vaccine mandate. So there's a couple different things going on in response to it right now.
All right, Rep, I'm totally with you, of course. I love it. I love how you guys are churning out these bills. It's fantastic. But let me play some devil's advocate here. So what do you say to the argument that you guys in Florida, you're infringing on the rights of businesses by banning them from doing what they want to do? So you're not the party of freedom because you're banning people from doing something. What do you say to that?
So this is really the big conundrum, the big issue in the Republican Party now, where I don't think voters are divided, but elected officials are certainly divided. And it's, what should we do to regulate private actors? So in my opinion, big woke companies, which are stepping on the rights of citizens, do need to be dealt with by force, whether it's big tech censorship, or in this case, tens or hundreds of thousands of working class Floridians telling their employers that they don't want to be vaccinated, and therefore they're going to be fired or treated worse work conditions for not being vaccinated. The Republican Party needs to take a bold stand on that. And, the question you should be asking is, whose rights matter more? The woke corporate board that wants to, play nice with the Biden administration, or the tens of or hundreds of thousands of working Floridians that actually vote for us, that actually believe in freedom, that just simply want to be able to be in control of them and their own family's healthcare decision making. So I call it crossing the Rubicon, and a lot of Republicans are elected officials are following me and getting to the position where they think the government does have a proper role to play in that regard.
Yeah, that's such an interesting political question, right? Like I could see how a libertarian, more minded person would say, no, all hands off, I guess in this case, that would result in the feds just doing whatever they want, forcing businesses with their mandates, or this more little activism Republican concept, which in this case, and I think these days we need to, I certainly am more inclined to follow. Let me ask you just technically on the ground with businesses you've talked to, what are they to do, right? Let's say you guys pass this bill that says businesses can't mandate it. Who do they follow? You got the feds saying you have to, otherwise we're going to fine you $13,500. And you got the state saying you can't mandate it, or else we're going to fine you $5,000. What's a business to do? How do they make sense of it?
So we have an overwhelming amount of businesses who simply don't want the mandate. Why? Because they don't want any mandate. They don't want any government telling them what they have to do. The only companies that are really enthusiastic about it are the really big woke companies, which are like quasi-state actors. They're basically like little governments. Walt Disney, the airlines, these giant companies, some that are stationed here in the state of Florida. So, I'm on the side of small business, and they want to be left alone, and that's what it's all about. But what do they really want in this exact situation in terms of like action step? They want the government to lead. So if the state of Florida steps up and says, no, we're going to protect you, that you don't have to comply with the OSHA mandate, whether that means willingness to fight the federal government court or pay the fines or just do what they need to do to nullify this law through legal means. I think that's really the step that Florida, that small businesses want to take, because they don't want to be just left out to dry before the federal government. They want the state to sort of protect them. So I think we need to make sure that we're letting states know that they need to be following our lead, not the federal government. So we need to be more assertive than the federal government.
Yeah, let's say I own a hardware store, right? OSHA comes down and says, we're going to fine you, Slater, $50,000 because you're not following our rule. And I say, oh, but Rep. Sabatini says I don't have to. What does that look like for my fine that the feds just gave me?
So this is where I I fit into the sort of the harder right of the party at this point. I do believe in actual legal nullification. Like the Democrat states nullified marijuana laws in their states. They did it by sort of ignoring all the federal laws, cutting off any sort of support, indirect support for the federal government on that issue. I think we need to do the same thing from the right. So what I would actually pass is a nullification law that says the OSHA rule that's about to be issued is null and void, and any federal agent that seeks to enforce it, it won't be recognized in the state of Florida, and that person would be actually seen as a trespasser on land. So if they came in to check the eye wash station or whatever, that's totally fine. But if they try to shut down or assess a fine based on the vaccine mandate, I believe that we should be directing state law enforcement or county sheriffs to actually arrest that federal employee. Now, some could say that's an extreme idea, but I really do believe that that's at the point we're at now. The other day I heard Tucker Carlson say, if they can, mandate a vaccine, what can't they do? I do believe that a line needs to be drawn in the sand. If we're allowing them to say whether you're allowed to work and own a business based on, us complying with their public health mandates, I just think we have almost no freedom left, and we really need to step up and fight.
Man, I stinking love that. And I love that. It's such a great, it's just states' rights. It's states' rights, state sovereignty to the max. And that's how it should be. And that's how our founders wanted it. And man, I'm grateful for Florida. You guys are giving me hope for the country, especially for me here in California. Representative Anthony Sabatini in Florida, what's your website if people want to send you to Congress?
SabatiniForCongress.com. And of course, I'm on social media too. Anthony Sabatini on everything from Getter to Facebook.
Great. Good stuff, Rep. Appreciate you, man. Keep it up.
Thanks, Mike. Take care.
It's awesome. Love to see that. That is super encouraging. I don't live in Florida, so it's not all as encouraging as it could be. But at least someone's putting up the fight. Everyone's got to draw their line somewhere. You better figure out what that line is, because if you don't have one, this will just go on forever, and you'll be played a fool the whole time. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.